Hello kids, we are back with another interesting story and it involves two mighty powerful kings. So the title is The Nemesis for Two Kings. Alexander set out from his small kingdom Macedonia with dreams to conquer the world in his eyes. He started out with an infantry of about 30 to 40,000 men and 4 to 6,000 cavalry. जो पैदल होते हैं soldiers उनको infantry कहते हैं और जो soldiers घोड़े पे होते हैं उन्हें cavalry कहते हैं. However, the formation that caused havoc in the enemy ranks was the phalanx. In it, he used several lines of infantrymen armed with long pikes, protected by cavalrymen on the sides and rear. मतलब जो इन्फेंट्री थी वो लाइनों में अपने हथियार के साथ थी, पाइक्स के साथ, और जो कैवलरी थी उन्होंने इस इन्फेंट्री को दोनों साइड से और पीछे से कवर कर रखा था. The elements of surprise and speed combined together to cause a deadly destruction on the enemy. It was the reason that Alexander often secured victories over his more powerful rivals. On the other hand, Persia was a large country in those times and was ruled by Darius. Persia had a large army, almost 2 million strong, which comprised of infantry and cavalry, both much stronger than that of Alexander. It is said that there were 20 men of Darius to 1 of Alexander. However, what went against him was the initiative. हालांकि डेरियस की आर्मी अलेक्जेंडर की आर्मी से बहुत ज़्यादा बड़ी और स्ट्रॉन्ग थी, लेकिन फिर भी अलेक्जेंडर ज़्यादातर उस पर विन करता था. Alexander and Darius confronted each other several times, but it was Alexander who chose time and place of each attack. So they were the attackers and the Darius's forces were the defenders. शायद इसीलिए अलेक्जेंडर ज़्यादा विन करता था क्योंकि उसका इनिशिएटिव होता था अटैक करने के लिए और डेरियस की आर्मी को अपने आप को डिफेंड करना पड़ता था. Of a number of battles that took place between Alexander and Darius, the first important battle was fought at Issus. Alexander was on his way to Syria with his force, which was as good as insignificant before his rival. Darius camped in an open country because he wanted to take advantage of his large cavalry, which could be effective in the open and plain fields. Alexander was miles away in Cilicia when he fell ill. He ordered his troops to stay back until he recovered. All this while, Darius waited with his 6 lakh strong force at Syria. And when Alexander did not turn up for battle for almost 2 weeks, his flatterers were at work. They said that Alexander had fled before his strong army. Darius was a brave king too. He decided that Alexander's way of retreat should be severed, कि उसका भागने का रास्ता ही काट दो. So he ordered his troops to march to Issus, which had a rough terrain. Hardly had Darius reached Issus that Alexander recovered from his illness and he ordered his troops to march on to Syria. On his way, he came to know that Darius had come behind him. So he hurried to Issus and he would favor such topography as his forces were trained for such a place. When Darius saw that Alexander was marching towards Issus, he hurried out. But before that, Alexander had reached and attacked him. A severe destruction was caused on the Persian army. Over 1,10,000 of its troops were killed and several thousands were injured. And compared to this, about 450 killed and 6,000 wounded on the side of Alexander. Darius fled from the scene, of course, with a resolve to take on Alexander later. In this battle, Alexander captured the mother, wife, and daughter of Darius. He displayed his manly character and he assured them that they would continue to live in dignity. ज़्यादातर जो जीतने वाला किंग है वो शायद हारने वाले किंग के अगर कोई सोल्जर्स या फैमिली को कैप्चर कर ले, शायद उनको इतनी इज्जत नहीं देते होंगे, अलेक्जेंडर देते थे. Alexander and Darius came face to face again after an interval of about 2 years. This time they had met at Gaugamela, also known as Arbela. Darius's forces comprised of 10 lakh troops and was considered to be invincible by all accounts. Seeing such a huge army, Alexander's general advised that he should attack at night because it would be dangerous to take on the mighty enemy in the broad daylight. However, Alexander turned down this idea. He said, Darius claimed that his last defeat at our hands was due to rough terrain, and now I don't want him to claim that I stole a victory at night. We will face him up in the day. Alexander proved lucky once again. Even Darius expected that Alexander would attack by the night, so he kept his army ready for his attack, which never came. On the other hand, Alexander and his army slept and refreshed themselves and did not launch an attack even late in the day. By this time, Darius's forces were all tired of the night vigil, and when they were attacked finally, they were torn apart in no great a time. Once again, Darius suffered a great loss of life and property, and he once again fled the battle, leaving his demoralized army at the mercy of his enemy. However, Darius had not accepted defeat. He wanted to avenge. वो बस बदला ही लेना चाहता था. And he tried to gather his army. He could manage only a part of his once strong army. He moved to the north of his capital and was getting ready for a final battle with Alexander, though in his heart he knew that it was an impossible act. On the other hand, Alexander was looking for Darius. Conquering adjoining territories, he looked for Darius. 1 year later, he came to know that Darius was to the north of his capital. He rode 400 miles in 11 days to go after him. It is a long journey considering the desert and lack of water. The greatness of courageous Alexander is even from an incident of this time in which some of his soldiers managed a small quantity of water from a far off place in the desert. All the warriors and animals were thirsty. Alexander was presented a helmet full of water, but he refused to drink it, saying that he could not drink it when his soldiers and animals were thirsty. It was in July 330 BC that Alexander came to know of the whereabouts of Darius. He was preparing to go after him when he heard the news that Bessius, the trusted friend of Darius, had betrayed him. Alexander immediately went in search of Darius. One of his soldiers reached the place where Darius was lying in a pitiable condition. Bessius had run through his sword into him, and Darius lay in a farm cart dying. When the Greek soldier reached him, he was saying, I, Darius, the great king of Persia, do hereby bequeath my empire to Alexander of Macedon. What a pity! The mighty king of such a mighty kingdom died of betrayal, unsung, unheroically. The soldiers rushed and informed Alexander immediately, but by the time Alexander reached, Darius had already died. Alexander paid his homage to the dead king and covered his body with his own cloak. Not only this, he sent his body to the capital to be buried in the grave beside his wife. अब अलेक्जेंडर के लिए ऐसा करना डेरियस के लिए बहुत बड़ा ऑनर था. Alexander got Decius searched out and gave him a violent death. All along his arduous and victorious journey, Alexander remained in the company of his dear friend Hephaestion. When he was about to enter Babylon, fortune tellers advised him against it, as it was a bad omen for him. Still, he wanted to enter the city. Just about then, his best friend Hephaestion died of fever. Alexander mourned his death in a strange manner. He got the manes and tails of all horses in the army cut off as a sign of mourning. अब अपने दोस्त की डेथ को उसने अलेक्जेंडर ने कैसे मोर्न किया या दुख मनाया? जितने भी घोड़े थे उन सब की पूंछ और गर्दन के बाल कटवा दिए. He hacked to death the doctor who had treated his friend. सिर्फ इतना ही नहीं, जिस डॉक्टर ने उस फ्रेंड का ट्रीटमेंट करा था उसको भी मार दिया. Not only this, he entered the country of Cosians and ordered the massacre of all people. He also erected a memorial for his friend. And then Alexander, the master of the world, entered Babylon. Demoralized after the death of his friend, he drank heavily and fell ill. He suffered from fever for 12 days and breathed his last on 10th June 323 BC. When Alexander was on his deathbed, he was asked who should succeed after him. He is said to have replied, "I don't want to condemn anybody to death. Let them fight it for themselves." What a pitiable death for a man who had dreams to conquer the world. दो किंग्स इतने पावरफुल, लेकिन दोनों की डेथ किस कंडीशन में हुई? सोचने वाली बात है.